All right. So we're going through our second book. The Pilgrim continues his way. It's the second part of a two-part series. The first one was The Way of the Pilgrim. And last week we were talking about a paper that this great guru, what do they call him? The Skizmik? Skim? Now I have to get my glasses on so I can read what I can't pronounce. Skimnik. So we're reading the paper of the Skimnik, and if you remember, the last argument was by a professor who was saying, how can you pray constantly if you've got other things that you have to attend to with your mind? And we left him. He left us with that argument. But tonight, the Skimnik is going to give us a retort to that problem. And in doing it, let me put all the mutes on. Now, I'm muting everyone, but that is not at all a rule or a law. If you want to say anything, no limits, then just unmute yourself and feel free to say what you need to say or would like to share. So, but tonight he's going to give an answer to that problem. And if you remember a few weeks ago in the Philokalia, we studied the three modes of prayer. Remember? And we said that, in the Philokalia, it's presented as three methods of prayer. But really, and this is going to be, at the time, I said, I don't think these are three methods. I mean, they are three methods, but I don't think that's how it's done. They're actually three levels of prayer that you move through to get to the third one. And I was a little nervous about saying that because it was a sort of an independent idea at the time, and it wasn't in the text. But tonight, the Skimnik here is going to talk about it in that way. Those three, he uses them as levels of prayer. So we have now some backup for an idea that was sort of hanging out by itself, in my mind anyway, covered up. So we're on page 149 of the book that I have, which has now fallen into several pieces.
Swami, what was that? Philokalia? What was that? Sorry, I think I never.
The Philokalia is as I look around for my copy, anyway, here it is. The Philokalia, this actually is not the whole Philokalia. The whole Philokalia is 5 of these. I have those also, but this one is a compilation where they've gone and grabbed all of the writings about contemplative prayer or prayer of the heart. And prayer of the heart and what we call meditation are the same thing, same idea. This is just from the Christian perspective, and this is from the Eastern Orthodox tradition. It was put together in the 1700s, or it was actually compiled in the 1700s from monks from the Middle Ages that had written their experiences, written lessons or sermons on their experiences in contemplative prayer. It's an amazing book. It's got a lot of great stuff in it. It's extremely Christian, and so if you don't know what that means, it might tangle you up a little bit. If you know what that means when I say it's extremely Christian, then you'll be able to kind of read it with that filter on, so that you can sort of get through the text without getting pulled into little whirlpools of what is this kind of ideas. And so, but it is interesting because it's kind of the old Christian way of thinking. So it always sounds like a very authoritative, staunch old man is yelling at you while you're reading it. So it's kind of got that feeling to it. But in essence, it's not that at all. In essence, it's just the sweetest instructions on knowing the beloved, on communing, living in a constant state of awareness with the beloved within. All right, so the Skimnik is going to answer this question. You can get the whole thing online in PDF format if you're curious about it, for sure. And if you can't find it, I can send one to you. So the Skimnik here is going to answer the retort about how can you pray constantly if you've got things to do or other demanding things for your mind. And the Skimnik says, the solution of your problem is not at all difficult. If we take into consideration that people who pray continuously are divided into 3 classes. First, the beginners. Secondly, those who have made some progress. And thirdly, the fully trained. Now, the beginners are frequently capable of experiencing at times an impulse of the mind and heart toward God, and of repeating short prayers with the lips, even while engaged in mental work. Those who have made some progress and reached a certain stability of mind are able to occupy themselves with meditation or writing in the uninterrupted presence of God as the basis of prayer. The following example will illustrate this. Imagine that a severe and exacting monarch ordered you to compose a treatise on some abstruse subject in his presence, at the steps of his throne. Although you might be absolutely occupied by your work, the presence of the king who has power over you and who holds your life in his hands would still not allow you to forget for a single moment that you are thinking, considering, and writing, not in solitude, but in a place which demands of you particular reverence, respect, and decorum. This lively feeling of the nearness of the king very clearly expresses the possibility of being occupied in ceaseless inward prayer, even during intellectual work. So far as the others are concerned, those who, by long custom or by the mercy of God, have progressed from prayer of the mind and reached prayer of the heart, they do not break off their continuous prayer during profound mental exercises, nor even during sleep itself. As the All-Wise has told us, I sleep, but my heart wakes. Many, that is, who have achieved this mechanism of the heart, acquire such an aptitude for calling upon the divine name that it will of itself arouse itself to prayer, incline the mind and the whole spirit to a flood of ceaseless prayer, in whatever condition the one who prays finds himself, and however abstract and intellectual his occupation at that time. All right, so he's saying it's very clear that one can do this. And actually, I would have brought in a little bit of a different conversation, saying your mind at this moment is doing how many things? Look at all of the business of running your body right now, and the mind is engaged in all of that. It's phenomenal what's going on in your body right now. I just ate a little bit of turkey soup made by my roommate, so that's being dismantled to the molecular level and being sent to places that it's needed in my body. My body temperature is being regulated. I'm balancing on a stool. I'm talking to you. All of these things going on at one time. So the mind is definitely capable of multitasking, no problem at all. And Sri Ramakrishna also says, that he gives that example, and we've shared it numerous times, of the woman that works in the mill. She's nursing her baby on one side of her body. She's giving change to a customer who has purchased some of the flour, and in the background, she's taking the pounded rice out of the rice pounder and putting fresh rice into the rice pounder at the same time, every time having to time it so that the hammer coming down on the wheel won't crush her fingers. And he says that is how we do our japam. That's how we do our prayer. You just get it going in your mind, and with some practice, you'll find that you don't really have to pay much attention for that to happen. After you've gotten it as a habit, one habit that I accidentally stumbled into back in the day. I used to work as a contractor, but I would walk to all of my appointments because San Francisco is very walkable. And between clients, I would take my mala, and as I walked on the sidewalk, every time my right foot hit the ground, I would start the mantra. So every time that right foot would hit the ground, and I just did that just because I thought, well, I've got the free time. I'll just occupy myself with that while I'm working. I didn't realize that within 2 weeks of doing that, I started to find that anytime I walked anywhere, by the time I had taken 3 or more steps, the mantra had started of its own accord in my mind when the right foot hit the ground. It just became muscle memory and became a part of it. And I haven't done that practice for a long time. And even still, if I walk, like I take a walk every afternoon, Now it takes a few more because I haven't done it regularly in the way that I used to. The mantra comes again, starts again in the mind automatically. So if you make a habit and tie it to something in your physique, you know, the way you walk, or to your heartbeat, or your breathing, or however you do it, tie it to something that will trigger it when that something occurs. And that's a great trick for getting the mind to come back to the divine when you've gone absent-minded and have forgotten it or aren't doing it. And so it's definitely possible. And then he's got these three levels of prayer. And we've talked about these in the past. Now he's talking specifically about the prayer, the Jesus prayer. Lord Jesus Christ, the Son of God, have mercy on me. And they just repeat that over and over. That's the Christian mantra from the Philokalia. But there's also another Christian work from the Middle Ages, from like the 1500s, I think, called The Cloud of Unknowing. And that specifically talks about japam, Christian japam. And the instructions in there says that word, that can be anything. You can use even a simple word like love or peace as your mantra for that practice. And you just repeat it continuously over and over and over again. And so that's the first level of prayer. The first level of prayer, you're using your lips, your mouth to say the word out loud. You're talking with God. You're sharing things going on with God. The second level of prayer is when that becomes habitual. You're aware of the presence more times than you're not, and you're just communing with the Lord and kind of talking in half sentences, because you know each other so well at that point that you don't have to spell out all of your stuff like you did when you were first starting your prayer. And then what he calls prayer of the heart. This is when prayer leaves the mind, because you've, in our case, we've practiced the witness consciousness, where we're watching mind, watching body, and going on. And so the prayer moves into the heart space. And now it's not even barely verbalized. I mean, the prayer itself may be running automatically in the background, but the experience of this prayer of the heart is more kind of a seeping, more like tea seeping in a cup. You are seeping in that divine love, in that divine presence within. You've touched that shrine in your heart, that you've found it, have discovered it, that part of you that is unchanging, absolute. You've established yourself there as the witness, and in that solitude and that peace, you're just enjoying God, like a partner that's you've been married to for 50 years, where nothing needs to be said anymore. They've heard all your jokes. You don't have to impress each other anymore. Neither of you is going to walk out on the other because you're old and ugly. and so you've just resolved to be together. And so that's how you're spending your old age. And God is that. God can play, or does play, that exact same function, although 1,000 times more intimate, because he's part and parcel of your interior world. So now the priest is going to say something. He says, "Allow me, Reverend Father, to say what is on my mind. Let me have a turn and say a word or two. It was admirably put in the article you read that the one means of salvation and of reaching perfection is frequency of prayer, of whatever sort." All right. And just in the gospel class, we just read this as well. Gospel class is Tuesday night. Yeah. So in the gospel class, that we talked about prayer as a means to God, that love first and prayer second. Remember, Ramakrishna was answering a question for one of the Brahmo devotees. What is the way? Well, the way is love and prayer. And he says, well, which is it, love or prayer? And he says, well, love first, but prayer second. So prayer is one of the paths to God. One of the fastest prayers, one of the fastest ways to God. It's a subset of bhakti, of course, of devotion, of love, of God. So the means of salvation and of reaching perfection, you're getting it backed up here in the Philokalia, is frequency of prayer of whatever sort. Now, I do not very easily understand that, and it appears to me like this. What would be the use if I pray and invoke the name of God continually with my tongue only, and pay no attention to and do not understand what I am saying? That would be nothing but vain repetition. The result of it will only be that the tongue will go chattering on, and the mind, hindered in its meditations by this, will have its activity impaired. God does not ask for words, but for an attentive mind and a pure heart. Would it not be better to offer a prayer, be it only a short one, even rarely maybe, or only at stated times, but with attention, with zeal and warmth of heart, and with due understanding? Otherwise, although you may say the prayer day and night, yet you have not got purity of mind. You are not performing a work of devotion. You're not achieving anything for your salvation. You are relying on nothing but outward chatter, and you get tired and bored, and in the end, the result is that your faith in prayer is completely chilled, and you will throw over altogether this fruitless proceeding. Further, the uselessness of prayer with the lips only can be seen from what is revealed to us in the Holy Scriptures, as, for instance, this people draweth nigh unto me with their mouth, and honor me with their lips, but their heart is far from me. Not every one that says unto me, Lord, Lord, shall enter the kingdom of heaven. I had rather speak 5 words with my understanding than 10,000 words in an unknown tongue. All this shows the fruitlessness of outward inattentive prayer with the mouth. Now we're going to get to the Shkimnik's response to this, but I'm going to give you Holy Mother's response and Tuckor's response first. It's like, yes, he's absolutely right. Praying with attention and with your heart is better. It is the way. But not pray, but praying even absent-mindedly is not a nothing. The name and form are always together, so you are still invoking the presence of God in that. Mother says, whether you're thrown into the Ganges or you jump in the Ganges, you're going to get wet. Whether you do it on purpose and with attention, you jump in, or whether just through absence you either fall in or somebody pushes you in, you're going to get wet. And so he says that you will get some benefit regardless of how careful you are about it. So it's better to do it than to not do it at all. And actually, the practice of doing it is to bring in that attention. The practice of jupam is training the mind to be present. There's not really any other way to do it. The mind is constantly distracted, and if you were to follow his suggestion of just praying occasionally with your full attention, what about all that period of time in between the occasionally? The mind is going to be distracted, and you're just going to be living in that state and not improving it. With the practice of jupam, you're training your mind to be one-pointed. And you have a tool, the repetition, the name, to keep coming back to bring bear the mind back on its point, on its purpose. So it's an ongoing practice, and that's why you do it. You don't just do it to talk to God. You're doing it also to train your mind, to calm the mind, to get some control of mind. Because in Eckhart Tolle's teachings, he says that you shouldn't be using your mind for thought unless there's a need to sit and think. That thought, in general, is an entertainment rather than an actual necessity. And before we jump at that one, we'll just bring that same statement again. I'm sorry to be so repetitive, but this is how we get there. Is that, while you're, gosh, I can't even remember what I was saying. Here I am doing the old man thing again. What is it that we always talk about? I always go into that little something about paying attention. What an irony. Oh my God. Well, I'll have to come back to it. Mother just pulled that right out by the roots. There's nothing in there. Let's see what the Skimnik has to say just about prayer. Gosh, it's going to pop in here in a second. I can feel it. The Skimnik. There might be something in your point of view if, with the advice to pray with the mouth, there was not added the need for it to be continuous. If prayer in the name of Jesus Christ did not possess self-acting power and did not win for itself attention and zeal as a result of continuity in the exercise. So he's saying what we just kind of came to through Thakur and Ma, which is a beautiful coming together there. But the matter now in question is frequency, length of time, and uninterruptedness of prayer, although it may be carried on at first inattentively or with dryness. Then, on account of this very fact, the conclusions that you mistakenly draw come to nothing. Let us look into the matter a little more closely. One spiritual writer, after arguing the very great value and fruitfulness of frequent prayer, expresses in one form of words, says, finally, many so-called enlightened people regard this frequent offering of one and the same prayer as useless and even trifling, calling it mechanical and a thoughtless occupation of simple people. But unfortunately, they do not know the secret which is revealed as a result of this mechanical exercise. They do not know how this frequent service of the lips imperceptibly becomes a genuine appeal of the heart, sinks down inward into the inward life, becomes a delight, becomes, as it were, natural to the soul, bringing it light and nourishment and leading it on to union with God. It seems to me that these censorious people who are like those little children who are being taught the alphabet and how to read, when they get tired of it, they cried out, would it not be 100 times better to go fishing like Father than to spend the whole day in ceaseless repeating A, B, C, or scrawling on a sheet of paper with a pen? The value of being able to read and the enlightenment which it brings, which they could have only as a result of this wearisome learning the letters by heart, was a hidden secret to them. In the same way, the simple and frequent calling upon the name of God is a hidden secret to those who are not persuaded of its results and its very great value. They, estimating the act of faith by strength of their own inexperienced and short-sighted reason, forget in so doing that man has two natures, in direct influence one upon another. The man is made of body and soul. Why, for example, when you desire to purify your soul, do you first of all deal with your body, make it fast, deprive it of nourishment and stimulating food? It is, of course, in order that it may not hinder, or to put it better, so that it may be the means of promoting purity of soul and enlightenment of mind, so that the continual feeling of bodily hunger may remind you of your resolution to seek for inward perfection and the things pleasing to God, which you so easily forget. So there he's talking about one of the practices we've talked about. Remember, we talked about 2 ways to walk down the street? Anybody remember what the 2 ways of walking down the street are? Nope. Okay. The 2 ways of walking down the street are, the first one is to be in your mind, in the world of change, in your thoughts. And so when you're in that state, you're looking at everything, you're distracted by the storefronts, the beautiful people walking by, the cute little dog, the wonderful child in the pram, oh, I just passed a Starbucks, oh, I've only got $2, I can't afford even a half a cup of coffee. So your mind, you're distracted, you're everywhere. And when you leave that crowd, you're exhausted. You just feel spent. That's the normal way. That's how most people walk down the street, fully engaged in the world of changing. The other way to walk down the street is the spiritual seeker, as the spiritual seeker. And that is residing in the heart, right? Firmly established in the silence of the self within and observing without comment or interest everything all at once, no particulars, just opening and being aware of awareness. And that way you're not being pulled in every different direction. And when you've spent your afternoon and get back to your monastery or to your house, you're not spent. You're not tired because you haven't been pulled out of your center. You've managed to stay in your center. And the way that you stay in that center by all of that watching is allowing everything that's changing to point at that in you which is not changing, right? Because that's why you can see all of that change. because you are in a place that is not changing, right? And I use my elevator story. If you're in the elevator, you can't see the elevator move because you're part of the closed system. If you're outside the elevator and you watch it, like those elevators on the outside of the walls, you can see the elevator moving up and down. Or if it's got a window, you can see that you're moving up and down. But if you're part of the system, you can't see the change of the system, right? And so it's that illusion. So for us, the way that we can see all of this change, we can see the change of the body, we can see the changing of the mind, we can see the changing of the senses. By necessity, that means we are not part of any of those three systems, or that we're part of it, but we're not the system, right? We can watch the mind. That means the mind is not us. We are separate from mind because we observe it, because we can query it, we can talk to it, we can get answers from it. And the body, we have to query the body. We don't know that we're sick until the body gives some kind of signal, some sick taste in the back of the mouth or some fever or something. So from that, we can deduce that we are not the body. And when we're walking around in town doing our business and we can see everything changing and all the bustling and all the movement going on there, you can know that you can see that because the part of you, which is observing, is not changing, is not moving, is always still, always absolute, right? And that's how we use these things that normally distract us to bring our attention to where we want it to be, on the presence of the beloved, on the presence of the divine within. So we use the changing of the world, we use the busyness of the mind. You know, when your mind is being really crazy when you're meditating, right? Normally what we try to do is jump right into the stirred up mind and try and quiet it down. Well, you can't do that. That's like if a swimming pool is disturbed and it's got all the waves, if you're going to try and still the swimming pool by jumping into it and slapping the waves to keep them all level, that'd be a hilarious thing to do because it's stupid. And so when your mind is active and you're sitting there in meditation and you start getting all worked up about it, oh, I'm so frustrating. I can't meditate at all. Mind, why are you being so noisy? That's the equivalent of jumping into mind and jumping into the pool and trying to slap down all the waves. Don't be affected by mind. Don't jump in there and get worked up. Oh my God, it's so messy in here. I can't meditate. I'm never going to realize God. This just isn't for me. I have to live my karma. You know, and you give yourself an extra 15 minutes free, get out of meditation free card in the morning. But see, that's not the way to do it. The thing is to watch the mind and say, wow, look at how noisy that mind is. That's all. And just keep watching. Don't be interested in it. Don't be disturbed by it. Don't feel like you have to fix it. Just let it do its thing. And if you don't have an interest in the mind, it will silence, you know, just like a crying child. You know, I don't know about everybody, but in our house, if the baby was crying, you might give it some attention at first, but you can also just go and lay it down in the crib and walk out and close the door. And you find eventually the baby quiets, right? When it realizes it's not going to get the attention that it was trying to get from screaming, it stops screaming if it's a healthy baby. So these are some tips for us in having a quiet mind. The mind quiets when you lose interest in it. And you lose interest in it by discerning, by understanding that the mind doesn't have anything for you. There's nothing in there that's necessary. Let it do what it's doing, right? And go on. If you find by experience that through the outward fast of your body, you achieve the inward refining of your mind, the peace of your heart, an instrument of for the taming of your passions, and a reminder of spiritual effort, and thus, by means of outward and material things, you receive inward and spiritual profit and help, right? That is the way this world is. This world can either take you away from God, away from your inner peace, away from your inner shrine, or it can deliver you to it. Avidya and vidya are both a part of Maya, both a part of this world. So it's how you observe it. It's how you approach it, right? If you go to the world thinking you can get something from the mind, or get something from the body, or get something from the senses, then it's going to be avidya. It's going to take you away from the silence within. But if you know firmly that you are a soul, a spirit, and that nothing in this world can fulfill you, which you've learned through discernment, not through a blind faith. This is a real difference in the Vedanta, is that there's no blind faith. It's a matter of study and perception. You've come to learn through observing that the world cannot fulfill you. It can take away a desire for a minute or two after you've fulfilled it, but almost as soon as you fulfilled that desire, it won't be but 5 or 10 more minutes before the mind starts thinking about, oh, that was really nice. I think I want more of that, and it gets more specific. Not only do you want more of it, but you think about ways that you could improve it. How could it have been more pleasurable or more fun? And you start coming up with, and you refine your taste for your enjoyment. And what does that do? It makes your enjoyment harder to obtain, because no longer will just any glass of wine do. Now you have to go find that bottle from that certain region of France from that one particular year when that grape was particularly dry and perfect, right? And that bottle of wine isn't $2 at Trader Joe's. It's $95 on the other side of town. But you're not happy any other way now than driving all the way across town and spending $95 on this bottle of wine, because you've become a connoisseur of senses. You've been a fool, thinking that your senses and the pleasure of your senses is going to give you anything. It doesn't. It distracts you for a moment with pleasure. That's it. It's a distraction. Nothing gets fixed. When you finish that bottle of wine, you're the same person as you were before you drank the first glass. You're right back where you were again, needing another bottle of wine or whatever your vice of the moment might be. So it's through discerning that we get to see that the things we thought were pleasure were only pleasurable as long as we boundaried or blinded the mind to look at only a small section of time and not to consider the whole, only consider the pleasurable part. And that's what we call delusion, right? Because when your mind wants that glass of wine, it doesn't think about the Saturday morning when you woke up with the headache, vomiting, had to clean up the mess in the living room. You don't remember all of that. You don't remember waking up and pounding your head and saying, oh God, I'm never going to do that again. What you remember is that little 15-minute segment in there where your drunkenness was at its peak. Oh, that was so much fun. Man, that party was great. Oh, that was so incredible. I can't wait. Next Friday, we'll do it again. All right. And you're stuck because you're not discerning. You're living on automatic. And when you go into that state, you're doomed until you come to your senses. So it's this discerning. So we use the world, use all the things in the world to remind us, rather, to be pointers to that which is true, that which we seek, the inner fulfillment, the inner self that has no lack, no need for anything, but is ever content, is ever stable, is ever confident, is bathed in the love of God, the love of the divine, which is constantly pumping through you. You must understand the same thing about frequent prayer with the lips, which by its long duration draws out the inward prayer of the heart and promotes union of the mind with God. It is vain to imagine that the tongue, wearied by this frequency and barren lack of understanding, will be obliged to give up entirely this outward effort of prayer as useless. No. Experience here shows us exactly the opposite. Those who have practiced ceaseless prayer assure us that what happens is this: one who has made up his mind to call without ceasing upon the name of Jesus Christ, or what is the same thing, to say the Jesus prayer continuously, at first, of course, finds difficulty and has to struggle against sloth or laziness. But the longer and the harder he works at it, the more he grows familiar with the task imperceptibly, so that in the end, the lips and the tongue acquire such capacity for moving themselves that even without any effort on his part, they themselves act irresistibly and say the prayer voicelessly. At the same time, the mechanism of the throat muscles is so trained that in praying he begins to feel that the saying of the prayer is a perpetual and essential property of himself, and even feels every time he stops as though something were missing in him. And so it results from this that his mind, in its turn, begins to yield, to listen to this involuntary action of the lips, and is aroused by it to attention, which in the end becomes a source of delight to the heart and true prayer, right? True communion with the self. And this opportunity here for pointing out that many of the things that spiritual life offers, the higher things, the beautiful things, are things that you cannot see initially. That initially it's about the discipline and about the self-control and just slogging through it. Sitting there watching the clock as you meditate, thinking, oh my God, it's only been 3 minutes and I've got 27 to go. Yikes. And you sit there and you want to quit. That's the beginning. Later on in life, for the fortunate few, it becomes a beautiful habit, or it becomes a thing enjoyed, a thing not to be missed. And you sit in that prayer and you do your repetition. And the first time something, you get these inward insights, your inner world begins to become clear to you. Like at first, when somebody says go inward, you're like, what does that mean? How do I go inward? My eyes are obviously looking out. How do I get them to look inward? And it's a matter of that's when you close your eyes and use your inner eye, the eye that can watch mind. You use that mind, that sense, and you watch the mind, and you start to become familiar. You start saying, hey, look at that. That's a repeating pattern. And then you come to realize that repeating pattern is triggered by a sense. You see something, you hear something, you taste something, and suddenly a memory is triggered, right? And at that point, if you get interested, then another memory is triggered and they come up, and pretty soon they surround you. And then at that point, if you try and control yourself and take charge, it's very difficult because you've got an army of thoughts that you think are you arguing against you, which is very hard. And you start to think, I'm arguing against myself. I can't do this. I'm going to fail. And you mess up, because what we're wanting to do is get good at watching so that when we see the trigger, we know what's coming. And we catch it at that point before it's an army of thoughts and memories. We catch it at that point when it's just a spark. We know that the mind's going to be triggered, so we stop it before it happens. And that's what looking inward means. It's observing the actions of mind in their relationship with the senses of the body, and to see how they work together, informing each other. And you become aware at that point over time that you're not necessary, that the body and the mind carry on this interaction all the time, even when you're not paying attention. And so that you start to see what Thakur was talking about when he says you're not the doer, which is one of the most frequent teachings that he gives, and one of the ones that is the easiest to doubt. You'd be like, what in the world is he talking about? I am the one that gets up and makes my bed and eats my bowl of cereal and brushes my teeth. But is it? The body knows that it needs to be taken care of. It talks to the mind. The mind knows the body needs to be taken care of, so it does the thing the body needs. It's the mind that goes to work, the body that does the work, and they go on. They would do it whether or not you as an ego self inhabited the body or not. That's why Sri Nisargadatta in his writings talks about things in the world happening. You don't do things, things happen. It's the body and mind interacting with this perceived or imagined outside world. And that is samskara. That's just the wheel of samsara rolling down the hill. You attaching to it is you believing that it's you doing it, making it happen. And that's attachment. That's what we're trying to break so that we become aware. And then the fun begins at that point. Right. So yeah, so just a pointer here, what he says, what happens in time as we've done our japam for a while and gotten practiced in it, he says it becomes a source of delight to the heart. And I can attest to that myself. I'm barely at that point, but I can certainly say that those times when I remember, like I said the other day, I'm really trying to do it anytime my mind lulls, to bring it into japa. And in the morning, I'm trying to make that my first thought in the morning. My first thought upon waking up is just to start japam and let things take their day, instead of sitting there thinking about what needs to be done and when I'm going to do it and how I'm going to do it. But just wake up and start the name. And that name immediately, especially when you first wake up, the sense of peace that it produces is just a delight, just wonderful. And the sense of calm that it produces, it really changes the way the day looks to you. If you wake up and just jump into the mind of change, then you're busy and you're a little stressed and, oh, I don't want to meditate that long because I'd rather get up to my job and get going on my projects, and everything starts beginning in the way of everything else. But if you get up and immediately hit the mother, not physically, you get up, you just go and, sit with the divine spirit for a while and enjoy it. Get your mind centered on that. And when you've come to that center, then you get up and you carry on your day in conversation. The day becomes your prayer. Can you imagine that? When you're in that state, when you're in the company of the mother or the divine within, then your activity of the day becomes a prayer. It becomes part, an extension of your communion, of your time with peace, your time with love within. And that's how life becomes prayer. And that's how your repetitious mantra becomes a life of prayer. So there you see the true and beneficial effect of continuous and frequent vocal prayer, exactly the opposite of what people who have neither tried nor understood it suppose. Concerning those passages in the Holy Scripture which you brought forward in support of your objection, these are to be explained if we make a proper examination of them. Hypocritical worship of God with the mouth, ostentation about it, or insincere praise in the cry, Lord, Lord. Jesus Christ exposed this for this reason, that the faith of the proud Pharisees was a matter of the mouth only, and in no degree did their conscience justify their faith, nor did they acknowledge it in their heart. It was to them that these things were said, and they do not refer to saying prayers, which Jesus Christ gave direct, explicit, and definite instructions. Men ought to pray and not to faint. Similarly, when the Apostle Paul says he refers 5 words spoken with the understanding to a multitude of words without thought or in an unknown tongue in the church, he is speaking about teaching in general, not about prayer in particular, on which subject he firmly says, I will therefore that men pray everywhere. And his is the general precept, pray without ceasing in 1 Thessalonians. Do you see how fruitful frequent prayer is for all its simplicity, and what serious consideration the proper understanding of Holy Scripture requires? Right? So we're trying to do this prayer, this constant prayer, initially is a tool, right? As are all things. It's one of we use the mind in order to transcend the mind. But first we have to get the mind under control. And we do that by giving it a task that it has to do continually. and a task that we can constantly bring it back to, and a task that we can measure our success with and come to realize, oh, the mantra has stopped. Let me start it again. And so it's through that constant renewal of effort that we reach that one pointedness. And when we've got the mind at one point like that, then the absolute stilling of the mind is just one baby step farther. Once you've gathered it all into one handful, you can toss it away. But if it's still stringing around all over the place, what will you toss away? You can't do it. So it's about a practice, but it's also about a revelation. It reveals to you the inner world. And that inner world, every time you go closer to that silence, it becomes more and more apparently infinite. It becomes your favorite place to be. The only place that you can be is actually what you come to know, that no matter where you are, there you are. You are always the absolute unchanging. There is nothing in you of the real self that moves. The wandering mind moves through the stillness of the self. It doesn't go anywhere. It just moves through the stillness without knowing the stillness. Your stillness contains everything. It's the stillness within that makes room for the noise of mind. Right. So let's take a look. Our pilgrim here is going to speak. The pilgrim, truly, it is so, revered Father. I have seen many who quite simply, without the light of any education whatever, and not even knowing what attention is, offer the prayer of Jesus with their mouths unceasingly. I have known them to reach a stage with their lips and tongue that could not be restrained from saying the prayer. It brought them such happiness and enlightenment, and changed them from weak and negligent people to champions of virtue. Right? The Shkimnik. Prayer brings a man to new birth. Right. A renewal of self, when you're no longer defined by the story of mind, when you're no longer attached to the outcome of every action, when you're no longer defined by body, by mind, by age, by gender, by education, by nationality, when you're set free from those things, nothing bothers you. Nothing bothers you at all. It's your identity with particulars that is always causing you trouble, always causing you to get worked up about things, right? It's like on 9/11, when 9/11 happened. I remember just how terrified I was. I was sitting there thinking, why am I terrified of this? And especially when I saw in the evening news that over in Baghdad they were dancing in the streets. And I thought, now how is that? How is that this action is causing fear and anger in me, but in them it's causing joy and excitement? I'm like, what is that? How is that? And I came to understand the reason it bothered me is because I considered myself an American. I considered myself, not to be Muslim. And by considering it myself and identifying with that definition of me, then those things became scary and offensive to me. But if I was one of the young men on the other side of the world dancing in the streets of Baghdad, I would have identified myself as not American and Islamic. And so it would have been a cause of great joy for me. Finally, the dragon has gotten itself punched in the eye. Woohoo! Right? And so it's your attachment that defines what offends you. It's what you identify with that decides what bothers you. Right? And you can sit there and the kid next to you on the train can be playing a video game and it's going beep, 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 beep. And if you identify yourself as an adult who needs quiet, you're going to be sitting there getting more and more and more worked up over this little kid until ultimately you take that game out of his hands and you throw it down the whole length of the train, and now you're in trouble with his mother. Right? Or you could identify yourself with someone who loves kids and you're like, oh, what kind of game are you playing? How long have you played? Do you like it? What do you like about it? And it would suddenly bring you a new friendship, bring you a great deal of joy to sit there with a child and learn about his world. And so you see, this is why we want to gain control. This is why we want to do jump'em, to get ourselves into a neutral place of observation that's objective, that isn't determined by the conditions of our mind, the conditions of our body, and the conditions of our senses. We want to come from a place that's conditioned by one thing only, and that is what we are: love, wisdom, and existence, this wonderful opportunity of being. Prayer brings a man to a new birth, as it were. Its power is so great that nothing, no degree of suffering will stand against it. If you like, by way of saying goodbye, brothers, I will read you a short but interesting article which I have that I have with me. All of them say, we shall listen with great pleasure. And the week after next, we will pick up with what that article has to say, the Skimnik on the power of prayer.